All right, team. This is, I think, it might be a first in the 9-year history of the Renwick Lecture to start on time, and that's a feat with the panel we have tonight. So I want to make sure we use their time wisely. I'm Tommy Screen. I'm Executive Director of the Institute of Politics here at Loyola, and I want to welcome you to the 9th Annual Ed Renwick Lecture. On behalf of Loyola University and tonight's sponsors, I'm thrilled each of you are here to join us for what I'm sure will be undoubtedly a great event. We're excited to announce the Norman C. Francis Leadership Institute has joined the Institute of Politics this year in sponsoring the Renwick Lecture. Allow me to say a few words about tonight's sponsors, if you don't mind. First, our guest. Founded in 2012 to educate and prepare men and women for consequential civic engagement, the Francis Leadership Institute was inspired by the life and career of former Xavier University president and Loyola alum, Dr. Norman C. Francis. The Leadership Institute's core principles are nonpartisan and directed towards advancing leadership skills that encompass cultural intelligence, spiritual enlightenment, and a steadfast moral compass. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Francis, who's with us tonight, and the many supporters of the Institute. Since our second sponsor's first class in 1968, the Institute of Politics has aimed to provide a practical political education to the future leaders and citizens of New Orleans and the surrounding region. Each summer, the Institute identifies men and women of outstanding leadership potential and brings them together each fall and spring for a series of lectures and discussions from some of the best political minds in the state and region. The Institute is proud to count numerous elected officials, dedicated journalists, and politically engaged citizens from across the region as graduates of our program. While both of our sponsors focus the majority of their attention on developing leadership and providing political lessons in a classroom setting, I'm proud to announce that this year, the IOP and the Francis Leadership Institute have stepped out of their collective classrooms to partner with the League of Women Voters to sponsor a very important civic project, the City Council Transition Project, which is being staffed by the Public Law Center and Mr. David Marcello. The Transition Project started 4 months ago after the elections with the hopes of providing the 5 new City Council members and their staff an opportunity to gain a comprehensive understanding of what is expected of them as they begin their terms in office. With a little more than a month to go before Inauguration Day, the project is well on its way to meeting its goal. David and his team have provided the participants in the program lessons on the state's open meetings and public records laws, the state ethics code, and policy discussions on pertinent issues. Join me in congratulating David and his team on this worthwhile effort. I'd like to take a quick moment to acknowledge 2 groups of folks who have joined us this evening. The first is the Institute of Politics Board of Directors. The board are a group of men and women who are committed to the mission of the Institute and take time out of their schedules to help ensure the Institute of Politics continues to educate young leaders each and every year. The 2018 Board of Directors are Dr. Bob Thomas, Ms. Cheryl Teamer, Ms. Susie Terrell, Ms. Catherine Gelderman, Mr. David Marcello, Mr. John Baker, and Father Kevin Wilds. While each of the board members deserves recognition, I'd like to single out Father Wilds this evening, President of Loyola University, and thank him for his support of the Institute of Politics and to the numerous efforts he's made in helping the city, including serving as the first chair of the city's Ethics Review Board after Hurricane Katrina and chair of the Civil Service Commission in Mayor Landrieu's term. After this year, Father Wilds, after 14 years as president of Loyola University, is going to return to the classroom. So please join me in thanking him for his leadership. Finally, I'd like to also publicly thank all the past fellows of the Institute of Politics, including this year's class who just graduated last week. Your continued support of our program is essential to its continued success, so thank you. Now to a couple of important announcements about tonight's event. First, as you can see, Mayor Morial is not here. He sends his regrets. He had a conflict that arose at the last minute and could not make it with us tonight. Finally, for those of you in the audience and those watching on the live stream who wish to ask the panel a question, please go ahead and tweet your question to hashtag RenwickQA, and I will get them to Clancy in a timely manner, and time permitting, he will ask your questions to the panel. With that, I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, Clancy Dubose, chairman and co-owner of the Gambit Communications and political editor and columnist for the Gambit Weekly newspaper. He serves as the on-air political commentator for WWL-TV Channel 4, where he provides his Clancy's commentary. A proud graduate of Loyola University School of Law, he is here tonight to moderate this great event. So Clancy, if you'd come on up and introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. The only thing you really needed to say about me was that I'm also a graduate of the Loyola Institute of Politics. I'm very proud of that. I, too, am sorry that former Mayor Morial couldn't be here, but I'm glad to know that he's visiting former Mayor Nagin and consoling him for not being able to be here tonight. I had to get that out of the way, okay? You knew something like that was coming. For the majority of its years, one name has been synonymous with the Loyola Institute of Politics, Dr. Ed Renwick. Considered the dean of New Orleans political analysts, Dr. Renwick taught political science here at Loyola University for nearly 40 years. He directed the IOP from the mid-1970s until his retirement in 2008. Although he is from Chicago and was educated in Arizona, Dr. Renwick quickly grasped Louisiana's complex political system. I guess I can call it that. He shared that understanding with his students and with the public. When not teaching, Dr. Renwick shared his knowledge with the rest of the city as an analyst and pollster for WWL-TV. His insights into New Orleans politics were fascinating, and his ability to predict the winner on election night was unmatched. Dr. Renwick was voted best pollster in New Orleans by none other than readers of Gambit. He was named a role model by the Young Leadership Council in 1995, and in 1999, he was inducted into the Louisiana Political Hall of Fame in Winfield, Louisiana. Although Dr. Renwick is not able to join us this evening, please join me in giving him a round of applause. Like Ed Renwick, tonight's guests share a great love for the city of New Orleans. Collectively, they have served as mayors for more than 40 years. There literally is no need to introduce them to you. Therefore, I will not read their bios. They're in your programs, so that we can get down to the business of hearing about their leadership and their experiences. Let's get to it. My questions, thank you. This goes to the three of you next to me, and I'll have a related question for you, Mayor-elect Cantrell. And I hope y'all don't mind if I slip up, because I have known and covered each of you for a long time. So if I just call you by your first names, I hope that's all right. You can fuss at me later. Moon and Sydney and Mitch, what one piece of advice would you give to Mayor-elect Cantrell that you wish someone had given you right before you were inaugurated?
I'm going to defer to Sydney on that.
Come on.
I don't know that. I'd have to think about that a little bit offhand. I will tell you that although I was a councilman at large and I sat outside of Mayor Sciro's office, unlike the sit arrangement the councilmen have today, and Mayor Sciro did rely on me a great deal to help him. I thought I knew something about the mayor's job, because I was very close to it. But after I took the oath of office, I realized I knew very little about the job. Found out that it was a much tougher, much bigger, much more demanding job than I thought it possibly was. So I wish somebody had told me that beforehand.
You still would have run. Sid?
They told me, don't worry about it, it'll be a piece of cake. but seriously, Moon said, had the very same feeling I had. It was really an overwhelming experience. Like Moon, I was on the city council, and I thought I knew a lot about city government. But once you get into the office of mayor, you know, the buck really stops there for the city. I mean, you can't walk down the street without anybody complaining about the potholes or about crime or whatever. And it's a full-time job. It's a very difficult job, probably the most difficult job, I would say, in the political arena, even with the president and the governor. So I would tell the mayor-elect, get ready. Welcome to the NFL, as they say.
Don't try to say, I mean, look, I only got 31 days, 16 hours, 12 minutes, and 42 seconds left, so don't. I'll tell you, I actually would tell you three things that two mayors told me. So my father, as you know, went and saw him and said, you know, what it gives. The night before I got sworn in, and he said, boy, he did call me boy. He said, tomorrow at 12 o'clock, you will own every pothole in the city. And I really thought that he was speaking to me figuratively, which he was. But it actually turned out to be literally true. And even today, not a day has gone by where somebody has not walked up to me and said, something is wrong in the city that you're responsible for, and that overarching sense of responsibility weighs on you. Mike Bloomberg told me, get a good scheduler because your time is the most important thing. And then he said, do the hard things first because that's when your political capital is at its highest, which I thought was very wise advice. What I did not know, and by the way, I told him this last week that he lied to me. And he said, well, how did I lie to you? I told you to do the hard things first. And I said, yes, but you didn't tell me that every day was hard. And that turned out to be true. And Mayor-elect, one of the things I would say that's consistent with the experience that both of these mayors had is it's so fast and it's so intense and the pitches are so hard, you cannot do everything at the same time. It's just physically impossible to do. So you got to figure out a way. At some point in time, it'll become manageable. It's just hard at first because it is more overwhelming than you have experienced before because you can't know it until you get there. And it's tougher than anything I've done as well in my life.
Related question that I have for the mayor-elect, other than what you just heard, what's the best piece of advice that you have heard since you won your election?
I would say the best piece of advice has been to pay attention to my child, to make sure that as I do the day-to-day and do the job, that I just stay focused on her mental health. As she is 10 years old, school, people can be cruel, people can love you at the same time, but not lose sight of my child and her needs as well as I focus on the needs of every child. And I've listened to that, and I think about that often, and wanting to be very intentional as to how I not only look out for her needs, but also understand that every child in this city, they're mine too. But wanting her to understand that she is a top priority and not lost in that. It's very important.
Again, for the former mayors, and I'll have a related question for you, LaToya. What did you know after year 8 that you wish you had known in year 1?
Repeat that question.
What did you know at the end of your term that you wish you had known at the beginning of your term?
I'm going to have to think about that question. I'm going to let Sidney answer it.
All right, Sid. He has seniority. He can do that.
I think probably the biggest thing that I wish I would have done while I was mayor for 8 years was to work closer with all of my associates and the people in the city. You know, those of us who run for political office, many times, you know, we figure the person who didn't support us may not have been interested in seeing you succeed. But I wish I would have lost that thought and worked more with those who opposed me as well as I did with those who supported me. I think maybe I might have been able to accomplish even more than I was able to accomplish. So I would think that's probably the biggest thing I thought about after leaving office.
To go, but I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
My answer to this question is related to my first one, is that your greatest strength turns out to be your greatest weakness. They look exactly the same. And you only have a limited amount of time. You actually have, let's call it 8 years, so we can be generous to all of us, because I think we all serve 2 terms, and you likely will as well, if history will repeat itself. And there are a definitive number of days, and there's only so much time to get done. So one of the things I'm trying to do is land the plane and finish the projects that I've started, understanding that it's a continuous government, and the mayor-elect and I have been working very closely during the transition. But you cannot do everything. So you have to do as much as you possibly can, but sometimes you can do too much. And it turns out that if you try to do too much, not every fight is equal. As my father told me before, the juice is not worth the squeeze on all of the fights. I burnt a lot of political capital, for example, on trying to reduce the number of juvenile court judges from 6 to 4. It absolutely, in my opinion, had to be done, but that took up so much time and so much effort. In retrospect, given what the yield was and what it cost you in time that you couldn't spend on something else, you might have thought, well, in retrospect, I would have let that issue pass. And I think trying to figure that out is something you learn better every day.
Do you have an answer now, Moon?
Well, I think looking back at it, we can always reflect on matters that we could have handled differently. And one of the things that a mayor has to protect himself from is ego, because so much is dependent on you that you begin to believe that somehow or another you can walk on water. I don't mean that literally, and I'm not sure it's true of everybody, but you go through this process of having to make these tough decisions. Now, you may feel that this is strange, and that the President of the United States is much higher and the governor is technically a higher level. But I urge you to understand that they govern at a distance. A mayor, whether it's mayor of New Orleans or mayor of Tickfaw, is on the job every day, and everything that happens is that mayor's responsibility insofar as the public is concerned. And I think you need to have, or I should have had, a little more self-control and perhaps a little more humility in the process.
Latoya, you've known or seen each of these guys up close and from a distance. What quality about each one do you admire most?
Well,
This is the ego stroke, Moon. That's all you're going to get.
Well, I would say for Mr. Moon, it was his courage to integrate City Hall. It changed the direction of our city and gave people real opportunity and a voice within city government. I would say to former Mayor Bartholomew, his ability, even in doubt by people, stood tall and brought real development to the city that I don't believe he has gotten great credit for, whether it's the New Orleans Arena, the aquarium, advancing that, the garage, even at the airport, the expansion there, really set the tone for future growth and development of this city. Of course, Mayor Mitch Landrieu, I would say being able to be elected in 2010, taking hold of the reins to ensure that the city of New Orleans truly did start with government, meeting our citizens where they were with the rebuilding of this city. Much of the growth initially was done by the residents on the ground, and government was almost nowhere to be found. And so he stepped in and stepped up. And so the three have definitely demonstrated ways that I want to mimic, having the courage to stand and really the ability to get things done.
Thank you. Because of this question's topic, we're going to start with you, Mitch. What's the first thing that needs to be done or changed from this point to fix the sewage and water board?
Well, you may remember when we came, a lot of things were in really terrible shape. We've made progress together. This city council and ours, and each one of these ex-mayors had a different relationship with that city council than I had with mine. I really felt like in the last 8 years, we did a really good job of working well together. And everything that got accomplished as part of a partnership. The Sewage and Water Board, though, is a very, very complicated problem to fix, but essentially, and Ann Milling can speak to this more than anybody else because we've been trying to do this for a long time. You cannot repair infrastructure with no money. And the single thing that has to happen, you're going to hate this, I'll say it, Mayor, you don't have to. We have to raise sufficient amount of funds on the drainage side to pay for the engines that power the pumps to keep the streets clean. We haven't done that. And the level of deferred maintenance. The board has been reconstructed twice now. The board is now populated with really good, thoughtful professionals. The leadership of the Sewage and Water Board is in the process of being transformed, and the mayor-elect will make some critical decisions in the next 6 months about what the leadership is. But essentially, what you have to do is reconstruct a plant that is pretty much, although you can't see it because it's spread out all over the city, bigger than the airport and the Superdome put together. And that is going to cost a substantial amount of money.
What needs to first happen at Sewage and Water Board?
Well, you didn't say first. You said what has to happen. There are like 18
No, I said
things that have to
first.
happen tomorrow.
I said first.
Oh, okay.
Sewage and Water Board is a mess. I'm inheriting a mess. And every day, I think the hole is deep and black, and only to find it's deeper and blacker by the day. But the first thing that needs to be done, actually I'm working on many of those things now because we can't even wait another 31 days in some instances. The chief financial officer, for example, is a top priority because we will not get to where our current mayor says we need to go with additional resources for drainage. We do need that. But if we cannot understand the existing financial conditions within the Sewage and Water Board now, we're not building the public trust to get us where we need to go. So first I have to hire a CFO. I have to ensure that a director, of course, is in place, as well as a chief operating officer. So these are critical hires. The upper and middle management of Sewage and Water Board are almost not there. And we have people here doing the work of those here. But we can't even pay them according and by the jobs that they're doing because civil service is saying that they're not qualified to do it, although they're doing the work. So it's a mess. So I can go all on and on and on. You can't make it up. But you know what? At the end of the day, I have nothing but I'm very much, I'm believing that we can overcome it. We can get through it. We can rise above the challenges. It can be better, and it will be.
What advice would you give to the mayor or to the citizens or the council about how to deal with the Sewage and Water Board? When you had to deal with it, and Sydney, you did too.
It's a very difficult question because it's a tough job, and you're dealing with a very old system. There are not many places in America where every drop of rain that falls has to be drained out of the locality. And we are built on a swamp. The founding fathers, I'm not telling you the French Quarter is a swamp, but outside of the French Quarter, virtually everything else was a swamp or marsh. So it meant that when we ultimately had to develop around the turn of the last century, not this century, one century before that, we developed this pumping system. This genius developed it, and we developed these pumping stations. But that did not cure the fact that we're built at sea level or below, so that every bit of water has to be drained out. Now, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with the willingness of the taxpayers to pay, not only for new installations as we develop new areas, but also to keep repaired all of the old facilities that you have. Taxpayers generally don't want to pay for those things that are not happening directly to them as of this moment. And even then, for the most part, they have a reluctance to pay it. I watch it on the simple things like the streets. I'm not talking about the street network. I'm just talking about potholes. Fix my street, Mr. Mayor, but if you go and say, we don't have enough money to fix them all, do you want to vote for a tax? You find no. And you're finding the same thing out in St. Tammany Parish. They're trying to pass taxes over in Covington and in various other smaller places, and the people just at times don't want to do it. I'm not fussing at the public, but it's just a fact of life. So democracy is hard, it's tough, it's difficult. And the Surgeon Water Board happens to have a very, very difficult job. And I think the mayor has to be more active with it than I was. I certainly was very inactive with the Surgeon Water Board. It was staffed by a group of very intelligent, well-positioned businessmen. Among Ann Milling is here. Stand up, Ann Milling. But they had their problems too. So it isn't a matter of personnel, people serving. It is a matter of keeping pace and be willing to go to the public and raise the funds necessary, either through the rates or through new taxation, to make the system function better. But it is never going to function as it does, as drainage does in other places that use gravity drainage, and every inch here has to be pumped out.
Follow me?
Someone said that, asked the question, how do you eat an elephant? And you eat a little bit at the time. And what I would say is, when the first day I remember going into office, I thought the problems were so overwhelming that, Lord, how was I going to get through all of the problems that we had to deal with? But don't be discouraged. Continue to follow your path, trust your own instincts, and work hard and get everybody to work together. I mean, even including the city, I think that all of us, I know, want to see you succeed, and I think most of the people want to see you succeed. I've heard it, and people say, how is the Lady Mayor going to do? And I said, I think she's going to do well. And so they say, I hope so. We're rooting for her. So know that everybody is rooting for you, even though you may make a decision that not everybody is going to agree with. But if you think and know that it's the right decision, then do it, and they'll eventually support you. So don't be discouraged, don't be overwhelmed. And I know Moon and Mitch, and myself, Mark, we all want to help you and see you succeed.
If I might, Clarence, let me just, two things. One, Mayor-elect Cantrell, one of the great things about what I did was I always had Mayor Bartholomew and my dad and Mayor Morial to reach back on. And there's not a time when I didn't have a tough issue, when I didn't pick up the phone and call them and said, look, I'm really lost here. And I remember that during your term of office, you might have confronted this where they were available. So will be available to you from all of us. But something that was implicit in what the other mayor said, I just want to highlight. There's so much to do in this city. The problems keep coming. I remember a time when I was feeling down on myself, and I said, man, I got a tough job. This is really hard. I think what I'm doing is harder than what my dad did, or what Dutch did, or what Mark did, or what Sydney did. And I really started thinking about it for a minute and started remembering all of the things that each of them had to deal with. And then I really got scared because I realized it just never stops, and that there is a bucket load of work no matter where the city is in our moment today. There is so much to do. And each of us had, so this is going to happen to you. I don't know what it's going to be. There's going to be something unexpected. He had Mark Essex, early. He had the Black Panther incident that was at Desire. Mayor, you had a bucket load. First memorial had the police strike and a lot of other things. The second memorial had the Pizza Kitchen killings. And it's just one of those things, as my father was alluding to earlier. This is no disrespect to the President of the United States or the senators or the congressmen. I really think the job of being mayor of a major American city is as tough and as immediate as any other job. And you will have plenty on your plate every day as the city continues to hopefully get better as the years go on.
I want to let the audience know, if you see me looking at my phone, I'm not being rude. The questions that y'all are tweeting in are being forwarded to me. So I'm going to ask one of them that came in, because this was a pretty heavy topic. I'm going to lighten it up just a little bit. Sid, we'll start with you. What is the funniest incident to happen to you as mayor during your term? Just think about Lancaster. I'm sure something will come to you.
I can't remember one particular funny thing that happened, but there were thousands of funny things that happened. And I think mentioning Lambert, he was a good friend and he was funny. He managed to make us all laugh at a time. And the council, many times we got together and laughed about all of the issues we were facing. But to find one thing funny that happened that I can remember, maybe I'll think about it later. And then
If it comes back to
tell you.
I know there's been so many difficult things to deal with. Mitchell, come on, you must have something.
Can't think of one funny thing that happened in the last 8 years. I'll maybe tell you something in about 6 months when I get a little time. Having Father Kevin on the Civil Service Commission was pretty funny. I thought, Father, thank you so much. This poor priest, he did his penance by being on the Civil Service Commission. Every time I call him now, this is funny actually, he says no. The first thing he does is says no. I said, I didn't ask you yet. He goes, whatever you're going to ask me to do, the answer is no. I've already done my job.
LaToya, do you have a light moment you remember from, your service on the council?
I don't know. I can't remember. I really can't. But some of the funny things that are happening now are the little girls when they come up to you and they're just so full of life and so full of joy. And I was at one of the schools recently, and a group of girls, second graders came up, and one girl asked me, can you change how much homework we receive? And I said, no, sweetie, Miss LaToya cannot.
See that? You're not even in office, you're already disappointing some of your constituents.
Well, Clancy, I will tell the mayor like this. When a hurricane comes and you have to walk out to that podium and do that press conference that y'all all see us do to let you know that we got it, you're going to get a call from Ray Ann. And Ray Ann's going to say, Mama, can you call off school tomorrow? Ray Ann's going to happen. That's happened to me a number of times where my kids said, Dad, you actually can. You can call off school tomorrow, right? And I'll be like, that's not how we do it.
Moon, any light moments you can remember, whether from the mayor or council?
Well, I'll tell one story, which is not really a light moment, but I think it has significance. But it's a fond memory. and it's worth remembering. We were trying to integrate City Hall. City Hall had no African Americans above the broom and mop job when we took off. But the world was changing. I'm not talking about me changing the world was changing. New Orleans wasn't going to survive with a white population and a black population, and the blacks having no ability to make the kind of contribution that they could make if they had the opportunities were open to them. So I knew that integrating City Hall was going to be a very difficult thing. It was not going to happen. You can pass a law, as the federal government did, and we passed a law on the city about public accommodations. That's a different thing. You pass a law, it happens, bang. But integration was different. It might have been the end of legal segregation, but it did not mean the beginning of integration, because that was going to take the effort of both black and white to make that work. In any event, I kept rejecting people that were given to me from the various black political organizations. And finally, Don Hubbard, who's here tonight, who is a great supporter and is a great citizen of this city, came to see me, and I'm going to use the terms exactly as it happened. I said, "What you got, Don?" He said, "Well, I want to talk to you." He said, "Your problem is you want super niggers." I said, "Well, Don, I'm not going to replace an incompetent white with an incompetent black. I'm just not going to do it. Now get me somebody who can do the job." And they came up with a fellow by the name of Pete Sanchez. Pete had been a major in the United States Army, and he was going to be the first black department head. Now, not where to put him. Put him somewhere where he can make a difference, where he's going to succeed, and somebody's going to have his back. I had a deputy director of the Department of Property Management, which is a very important department because it controls all the city properties, fire stations, police stations, all the work that goes on around them, etc. And Pete had opposed me, not because he didn't like me. We were pretty good friends, but he thought Fitzmaurice was going to win. I told him not to worry about it. So in any event, but under the old rules, he was supposed to walk the plank. So I called Pete in and said, "Pete, would you like to keep your job?" And, "Oh, man, Mr. Mayor, I'd love to keep my job." I said, "Well, I need a favor of you. I'm going to put a black in head of your department, and I need somebody to make sure that he protects his back and that he makes it." And I said, "Were you willing to do that?" He said, "Yes, sir, I am." So Pete Sanchez gets appointed. The fellow that I'm talking about was named Pete Gagliana. He was a swarthy old Italian. And then there was Pete Sanchez. And for the rest of our tour, you never saw one Pete without the other. And it became known as Pete and Repeat. And every time I think of that story, I just have to laugh about it, that these two men, both needing one another, became such close, inseparable people at City Hall that you never saw one without the other, no matter where they were, because they became known as Pete and Repeat. Now, I think that's a very funny story based upon a very serious matter.
And Pete Sanchez's name appears on the community center in the lower Ninth Ward today. Well, probably actually very closely related to what you just talked about, Moon. One matter that each of you has had to deal with, and Mayor-elect Cantrell, you will have to deal with. It is every Southern politician for the last 100 years has had to wrestle with the question of race and race relations. It has played an outsized role in local politics across the South. Talk about race relations. You just did, Moon, at the beginning of your term. And how much do you think you were able to, with the assistance of the council and organizations and whoever, to move the needle in the right direction?
Well, I think it's a little bit bragging, but I thought we did pretty well with it. And it wasn't something that you could just talk about. You had to do it. And remember this, it's not about ending legal segregation. I said this earlier, and I'm going to repeat it. Federal government passed the law, and everybody said, thank God it's over with. Well, it wasn't over. It was just the beginning of the beginning. How do you now get people to begin to function together? So as mayor, you're faced with this. Now, it wasn't a matter of just getting one department head. We had to get another one. We went did it in finance. We had to do it in, I think we did it in sanitation. I'm not sure. We did it in...
Sydney was a department head, wasn't he?
Yeah, Sydney.
Department
Sydney was with welfare department. So it was a matter of trying to get a reasonable balance. And it wasn't just department heads. There were many, 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 many other jobs throughout. Then you had the question of, well, what do you do about those things that are not controlled by the public law? How about the Chamber of Commerce? How about the International Trade Mart? How about the YMBC, which were all white? How do you get them involved? Well, you had to go to them, and this is not something you can brag about doing. It was a matter of just approaching them and saying, you have got to do this. Well, we can't do that. Well, if you do it, if you don't do it, I'm going to declare you off balance, off the agenda insofar as the city is concerned. It happened with the International Trade Mart. I said, if you don't do it, I'm pleading with you. I'm on my knees pleading with you to take in appropriate, competent people. I'm not asking you to take in somebody who is not capable. I am talking about not rejecting very competent people because of the color of their skin. And if you don't do it, I'm going to declare you off limits, and not one council general is going to set his foot in this building. It's the kind of thing, I know that sounds like a brag to you, and I'm proud to say it, but it took that kind of effort on a day-to-day basis. Then you look at the other side of it, and you see where the blacks did not necessarily want to surrender their cultural things either. And I'm not talking about surrender. I'm just talking about, I'm not sure I want to move into this white environment. I don't feel welcome. I don't feel comfortable with it. And then you had I don't mean to give a speech, but apparently I'm doing that.
I'll cut you off in a minute.
But the unintended consequences of things. Okay, we integrated the hotels, right? We integrated restaurants. What happened? We integrated many other places. What happened to the black institutions, not all of them, but many of them, once the white institution became available and blacks could go to a better place, better in the sense of nicer, upscale, etc., what happens to those black institutions? And many of them faded. Another crazy thing that you probably wouldn't think of, and I certainly had never thought about, sitting in a Roosevelt Hotel at a banquet with the first black sitting at a table at this banquet. And the server comes to the table, and that server is a professor at the university or at some high school, and his student is sitting at the table. But that person is moonlighting, and of course it was never disclosed until blacks were sitting at the same table. I went to another party, and I asked the fellow, I said, please have a black for me, okay? You gotta have some blacks. I don't know any. I'll give you the names. So I gave him the names, and this is a very beautiful home with a cocktail party. And I walk in, and lo and behold, the butler is serving a drink to his son and to 2 or 3 other people. And there was no reflection on behalf of the other people that they knew who this butler was, though it was the father of the guy, of the black who was in the group. And I went to the host afterwards because I'd suggested he do it and gave him the names. And I told him the story. And I said, I walked in the back and I told the butler, I won't mention the names, they're very prominent people. And I said, I'm so very proud of your son. Because his son, who was invited guest, had really done extremely well. And so had this butler, who was a famous butler in the city. But you run into those kind of things. And are they humorous? No, I don't think that's humorous at all, and I'm not so sure you asked me a question about humorous, but you're talking about an event that sticks with you. And I could tell you 100 of those, and I'm sure Sydney and Mitch have
Let me
gone
tell
through.
some now. I said, you got on the council when Dutch came in, so this is putting a burden on you, but talk about what it was like when you first got on the council in Dutch's tenure and then your own tenure as mayor.
Well, it was very difficult, I think, because, there were many parts of the community that didn't want to accept Dutch as being mayor. Similar to as there were some people in America that didn't want to accept Barack Obama as president of the United States. So it was difficult because we had to try and keep a balance and make sure that we right some of the wrongs that existed. There were several issues where race did come up, and particularly I'm thinking about probably the most controversial thing at that time was when Dorothy Taylor, who was a council at large, introduced the ordinance to integrate the cruise of Mardi Gras. That was a very, very tense thing, and we met. I formed a committee to help try and ease the pain, and basically met with the captains of the cruise and said, look, it's time for us to integrate. This ordinance is not going to hurt anybody, and many times people, African Americans, are not going to want to join anyway, but you can't have a policy that discriminates against African Americans and women, because women were part of the issue too with many of the clubs. I remember Blaine Kern said some of these old rough guys didn't want a nice, cute little lady standing on a float next to him, And he said that on national television, And so I had to disagree with him, I said women can't be discriminated against either. And we passed the ordinance. We met with the crews and encouraged them to accept the fact. And many people said that's going to be the end of Mardi Gras. And there were 2 crews or 3 that did not parade that year. But now Mardi Gras is bigger than ever, more integrated than ever. And that was the right thing to do. And so there are times when you have to do things like that to help the society move forward. Another instance was when we were passing the legislation for the casino. And I knew that many times African Americans didn't participate in the economic development projects. So I told the governor then that we had to make sure all of the citizens in New Orleans participated, had a chance to do the jobs that were going to be available, because we figured about 2,000 jobs would be created. So I said, I'd like to add an amendment to the bill so that we can guarantee that would happen. And I knew the Supreme Court had ruled that you couldn't name people to particular positions because of race. So what I suggested to him that we make 80% of the people who are hired at Harris would be New Orleanians, knowing that we were 70% of the population, so that was a chance that we would definitely make sure everybody had an opportunity to participate. Naturally, the legislature balked at that, but I was able to get 55%. So, and you see that there are more African Americans working in the casino here than anywhere else in the country. And that's basically because we were able to pass the legislation. And so it's necessary to get legislation passed to make changes in society where the law is not an impediment, but a chance to encourage the acceptance of the population, that all of us are citizens and we all have a right to enjoy the benefits of what America and our communities have to offer, particularly in economic development projects.
Well, Mitch answers, what you've just heard from these two guys is about 35 years of New Orleans history. So Mitch, you didn't have any race issues?
I didn't have any
in
racial
there?
issues at all. They fixed them all before I got here.
Go ahead, your turn.
Couple brief things. I didn't want to. Latoya said something that I wanted to make sure that y'all heard. Sidney really has not gotten as much credit as he should about two massive economic development projects. One, the casino. No Sidney Bartholomew, no casino. They just straight up. The other one was the arena. No Sidney Bartholomew, no Pelicans. At the time, Mary Landry was treasurer, and they had just passed a good government thing, said you had to have a feasibility study before you built a new capital project. I was in the legislature at the time, and we were thinking about building this arena. The mayor had this idea to create a sports complex and to actually build the arena. But they did not have a feasibility study. And Mayor Bartholomew, you got a pen, Sidney? Mayor Bartholomew walked up to me and on a napkin did this. That's my feasibility study. And we were able to figure out how to build that arena with cash. It cost $114 million. And that thing was built before we were able to get that team to come here. And so those were his two big projects that I think people forget about in time. My dad had a bucket load of them. Dutch had a bucket load of them. He's got one of them named after him, the Ernest N. Morial Convention Center. The land was purchased earlier. And so it goes on. And Marilyn Cantrell, you'll have a lot too. On the issue of race, let me just say a couple things because I'm in this, as you all know, right now. Everything that I know about race, I learned from my mother and my father and Norman Francis, who's sitting right there. But basically everything that I know, and the guidance came from Sidney and Don and so many other people. So I never did anything on my own, and I never learned anything on my own. I can tell you this, especially where we are in the country right now, where we're actually testing this assumption frontally. This is the first time since, I don't know, the 60s, where the country is grappling with the issue of whether diversity is a strength or a weakness. I believe it's a strength. I actually think that it's the great sin of our country that we haven't solved this problem yet, even though I recognize, as John Lewis so often says, that we have made tremendous progress, and you know that we have, and everybody on this stage is a reflection of the great progress that we've made. But you've seen with the discussion of the monuments here that we're not anywhere close to where we need to be on the issue of racial reconciliation. It is a great need in this country to reaffirm our position that I think the city of New Orleans actually speaks to better than any other city in America, and this is our great responsibility, is to reflect back to the country what diversity really looks at. You will remember that when Katrina hit, the nation really took a deep breath because they thought they were going to lose this city. And what they thought they were going to lose was the soul of America. And our soul comes from our multicultural depth that we have. And obviously, the monuments have demonstrated not nearly as much as people think, but a schism, because a lot of people who voiced most of their opposition, notwithstanding some prominent people in the city of New Orleans, most of the people in New Orleans understood what we were doing. They understood that that was a continuum of the work that Dr. Francis has done, and Aretha Castle Haley, and Lolis Eli, and all of those other individuals. But just to show you how damaging it was, because you know I'm a smart politician, or even if you don't agree with me or like me. We poll a little bit. We kind of know what everybody's thinking from day to day. When I got elected in this city, I got 66% of the vote. The third time I ran and won, but in the first election. And I got an equal number of white and African-American votes. After the monuments thing, my white support evaporated. White people in this town said, we don't like you anymore. And it was directly related to the monuments, which meant that we scratched something that was really, really deep. Now, I happen to think that we're on the right side of history, and I do it again tomorrow, and I feel more strongly about it today than I did when I started. That's how I feel. But the way that you have to deal with the larger issue of race that you've heard from both of these mayors, and Mayor Cantrell's been a champion on this issue too. One of it is legal, using the power of the mayor's office to actually make sure that you guide people who want to do business with the city to make sure that they are open to doing business in the African American community. And so we now, sanctioned by law, can really aggressively push disadvantaged business enterprises and to make sure that a certain percentage of contracts that are given out by the city are given to DBE firms, by the way, which do great work. And you can do that at the Surgeon Water Board, and you can do it at the airport, and you can do it where, as Mayor Bartholomew was talking about, when you're legislating and you say, if you're going to do a deal with Harris, you've got to make some commitments to do this. So that's the way the law handles it. You can use the soft power, which is fairly significant in the mayor's office, to work with the business community and say, you know what, you got to stop fighting this. Our diversity is our strength. You've got to reach out and let the people of New Orleans build New Orleans to make sure that the private sector community, and you know what, when they don't, you have to be willing to use the power of the mayor's office to embarrass them and to shame them and to let them know that the ethos of the city of New Orleans is forward, not backwards. And then you have to hope that people follow the spirit of what you're trying to do, just not the law. What my dad was alluding to was, and he's told this story many times, and so has Norman, that when the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down, you know, the decision said integrate the schools with all deliberate speed. And everybody thought, wow, it's over. It's finally done. Well, what happened was for a lot of years, people, even though the law was a certain way, they just did not want to come along. And so this is really just as much about the spirit. And I just really think that the one thing, there are many things that are wonderful about New Orleans that the nation will replicate, but the one thing that we do better than anybody else, even though we have our problems here, is we reflect through our music, through our food, through the way we work with each other now, through the way we elect each other, that diversity is a strength and not a weakness. We're better together than we are apart. But this is obviously a battle that's being tested right now by this nation, where people are being judged by their race, their creed, their color, their nation of origin, and people are trying to go back. And I just think as part of a country, we have to forcefully say we're not going back there. Wherever we're going again, it ain't back, it's not back that way.
Thank you, Mayor. Latoya, your views on what you encountered when you first came to the city and what you aspire to do as mayor.
Well, you know, when we talk about or even think about race, it's not one-dimensional. And the reality is the experiences are different, and white privilege is real. And in the fabric of our city, the city of New Orleans, the census data tells us that. We just had a disparity study that's clarifying. So dealing with the facts, the bottom line is that majority of African Americans don't have the same piece or slice of the pie. That's a fact. You have per capita $14,000 for blacks, upward $31,000 for whites. I mean, that's a fact. So the challenge and what has to happen is to ensure that people really do have access, where they have the ability to build wealth and transferable wealth. And while I do very much champion the DBE policies that the mayor enacted, that I supported, we even have to think bigger than that. meaning that having minorities, African Americans, being a true equity partner in the deal, and not just by DBE. This has to happen. And it's the wealth piece, but even when you look at areas in which the majority of African Americans live, the fabric of the neighborhoods are even different. Upward social mobility, people want that. So that's the opportunity. It really is the opportunity, and that is what I do plan to focus on as mayor, but working directly, of course, with the New Orleans City Council and with the people of this city. But we are in this together, and we're not going to be better if the largest population of people in this city are at the bottom. Just won't happen. So the talk is good, but the walk has to be, and I'm prepared to continue that path on that trajectory, taking that walk.
Question is somewhat related to that. I'm going to start with you, Mayor-elect, because it's really kind of in your court as you come into office. You mentioned the disparity study. If it were in the city's power to get around state preemption on the issue of minimum wage, I know you would support a higher minimum wage. What do you think would be a fair minimum wage for this city?
Well, the research, really is pointing to upward of $15 an hour. The research tells us that. And then when you look at the cost of living that has increased significantly in the post-Katrina environment, where the gaps have actually gotten wider, and the disparities are not just in wealth, it's housing, it's transportation, it's all of these different variables. So we have to ensure that people can make a living and be able to afford here. But you also kind of touched on, it's now the ball is in my court. And I'm actually happy about this guy to the left of me having the courage to really not only talk about race, but move things forward in its regard. Because being African American and a female coming in to office as mayor, starting that conversation, I think it would be accepted a little bit differently. White people can do some things that black people just can't do. Timing is everything. So he set the stage, and so now I don't have to bring it up because he's done that. Now I have to carry it and make things happen. And that's how you really do pass the baton to improve the quality of life for people.
Not that I can stop you, but go ahead.
Current mayor privilege. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. But you touched on something that I want to wake you all up to in here. What's happening right now across America, and of course when the mayor-elect gets in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which she'll be in, she'll start to figure out what's happening around the country too, and good ideas that can be brought back or bad ideas that you don't want to bring back, is this notion of preemption. And your state legislature is terrible about this, as are legislators around the country. When a legislator from Shreveport doesn't like, for example, a white legislator from a suburban parish in Shreveport, what the mayor of the city of New Orleans is doing, they are now getting into the practice of having legislators that are not from here telling the city what to do. And the laws kind of let them do that. And mayors do not have as much freedom. And these mayors will express this frustration if you gave them time ad nauseum about how limiting the state legislature can be. And in some instances, create taxation without representation. And this issue of preemption is going to exacerbate in the next couple of years. So let's just say, for example, she never told me she wanted to do this, but if we had the freedom to raise the minimum wage, then the city council would think about it, and then they would decide what to do, either with the vote of the people or against it, depending on what the charter says. There are many things that we can't even address. Gun safety laws, we can't address. Taxing policy, there's only a limited amount of things that we can do. And essentially what's going to happen in the next 20 years in America is cities that have money are going to do well, and cities that don't have money are going to struggle. So back to the issue of the Surge and Water Board, which is just a major challenge going forward. And we don't really have the kind of latitude, we being the city council or the mayor, and you, the citizens, don't have the kind of latitude because legislators who are not from here actually have the power to tell you what you can talk about and what you can't. And that's going to be something that cities in America are going to have to deal with, that are going to either expand the opportunities of cities to fix themselves or limit them fairly significantly. Washington's not coming back to save cities in America, not in the next 10 years.
Well, and I think it's also important to acknowledge why that is, meaning why the state, why we're in this situation. It didn't happen overnight. It happened a long time ago. And why did it happen? Because the backbone of this state has been the city of New Orleans. That is a majority African American city. So these laws and these policies were adopted and passed so that it could keep things back. And so southern cities in particular are seeing more preemption because they're faced with the same landscape that we are here in Louisiana. But it means that we have to stay focused, we have to get engaged, we have to vote, we have to support to change, to ensure that we have people in positions that are looking out for all people and not just a few.
I'm just going to make an observation because it triggered a memory. When I was a much younger reporter, my hair was all the same color. I covered a fight in the legislature where the legislature tried to preempt, or it was called back then, take away control over Audubon Park. And Dutch Montreal had to go to court to establish that Audubon Park was actually a city board, not a state park and not a state board. So this is not new, but it happened to the first African-American mayor of the city of New Orleans, who was trying to integrate the Audubon Commission. And so it's a tale that these guys have been around a long time, but so have I. We've seen everything 2 or 3 times now. We're now going into what I'm going to call the lightning round. One-word answer, yes or no. Okay? One-word answer, yes or no. Are term limits for mayors a good idea?
Yes.
I know how you feel, Sid.
Yes.
Yes.
Latoya?
Yes.
All right, Mark's not here, but if he were, he'd say no.
I don't know. He might now. He might have changed his mind.
I lived through that effort, okay? So this is not a one-word answer, but it's a short answer. Who was your toughest political opponent, whether as mayor or before you became mayor?
Jimmy Fitzmaurice.
Who, you?
No.
Sid?
that's my tough- I have no idea.
Bill Jefferson.
I had no tough.
Mitch?
Well, people forget Mark Morial. First mayor's
1994.
race. Yeah, sure was.
Latoya?
Don't get me going on that. Because I don't really see the opponent, I see the machine, which is a problem.
I think the audience understands what you mean by the applause. Who has been the best governor that you have ever worked with? The best governor that you've worked with, whether as mayor or a legislator or council, because 3 of you all have served in the legislature and 3 others of you all have served on the council. Who is the best
Well, your
governor?
question opens, and I won't answer that question without, give me
Go ahead.
give me just
I'm going
a
to show some deference.
couple of minutes to explain something on behalf,
I'll give
I
you
think,
2 minutes. Go ahead.
of everyone sitting up here. The city of New Orleans does not sit in isolation. We depend on a relationship with the federal government and with the state government. You can be fortunate or unfortunate. I happen to have been very fortunate to have had a governor that was, in fact, there's 2 governors. One was John McKithen, the other was Edward Edwards, who were very favorably disposed to discussion of whatever we needed. And it may surprise most of us in this audience, or most of you, that as a president, absolutely Richard Nixon was fairly easy for cities to work with. Now, that changed, of course, later on. But they shifted the burden, they shifted the focus to the states instead of the cities and local governments. So the relationship was then focused between the federal government and the states, expecting the states to take care of the local governments, which they could do and their responsibility, but they never necessarily did it fairly. And so I was the beneficiary of both a good governor, a good legislative group when I was in office, and a good president, if not a good president, a president that was good for the city,
Well, you can say he's good now. It's okay.
and a Congress that was rational. Now, if you happen to be a mayor that has bad governors,
This is the lightning round, Moon.
lightning
Okay,
round,
okay? All right.
that they can speak for themselves.
Well, I'll say that when he mentioned Richard Nixon, a Republican president, created the revenue sharing for cities, and that was a revolutionary
Yes, it
idea
was.
that really did keep
sure did.
cities afloat in a very difficult time. Sid, the best governor you worked with.
Ronald Reagan killed revenue sharing. But without a doubt, Edwin was such an easy governor to work with. Buddy Roma was the other governor I had to deal with, and I don't think he liked New Orleans. I would say that when the city votes for governor, they really have to perceive who's really likes New Orleans, because it makes a difference. Edwin Edwards was there when I called on Pick and Save to get an overpass like that. And the commitment for one casino, Edwin Edwards like that. The basketball arena. The basketball arena was a little tougher because I had to convince him that New Orleans, how I got it was...
It costs a little more than an overpass, though, you got to admit.
Well, yeah, but he was refinancing the dome, so
Right.
this is a good story. I'll hurry up and say it. So I say, Governor, you're refinancing the bonds and you're building the baseball stadium in Jefferson. I said, in the city of New Orleans, 85% of the money is coming from the city to pay for those bonds. So New Orleans should get something. He said, well, I'm renovating the dome. I said, but you're doing that for the Saints. So he said, what do you want? I said, basketball arena. And he said, okay. And basically, the concept was to get a professional basketball team, which we once had.
And Mayor Bartholomew, as a reporter covering that story, I gave this proposed arena a nickname, and I didn't mean it in jest. I called it the Sydney Dome. And when the Hornets came to New Orleans, I called him up. He was by then the former mayor, and I said, congratulations, Sid, it finally happened. And he said, I'm glad somebody remembered besides me.
Sydney, I remember.
Mitchell?
I remember.
Yeah.
No Sydney, no
Well, you were in
Pelicans.
the
Y'all remember that. I was
legislature.
there. And that's a true story that he told about it. That was a backroom deal, by the way. That's how that got done. And those work sometimes. Just historically, just on the, I would, again, because people don't really remember this, Nixon, early on, was a great president for cities. Bill Clinton was great, and then Barack Obama were the three who were better than all of the others. I had the occasion to work with, I think, every governor since Edwin Edwards in his fourth iteration, in his third iteration, and then Buddy, and then Kathleen and Mike, and then Bobby, and then John Bell. Did I miss anybody? I think I got it. And I have to say that as the city of New Orleans goes, Buddy was probably the least in favor of New Orleans and had other issues because he was a one-term governor and Edwin was always sniping at him. I had Governor Edwards, when he was at the end of his career. So he wasn't as forcefully able to help New Orleans, but he was always an immediate yes. Surprisingly, Mike Foster was not as anti-New Orleans as people thought. Governor Blanco was always helpful to the extent that she could be, but she was somewhat hamstrung. Governor Jindal, to his credit, because whatever you think about his politics, he was excellent at emergency response. And the city of New Orleans had, of course, as you may remember, a lot of challenges regarding emergency areas. And then John Bell Edwards has actually been spectacular for our city. This governor has been there every minute that we have needed him on everything that we've needed him for. Really been great.
Mayor-elect.
Well, of course, in my short period, I would say John Bell Edwards is making the right moves for the future, I know, of not only the state, but surely New Orleans, especially as it relates to incarceration. The first election that I voted in, I believe here, was when Edwards was running against Duke. And boy, oh boy, it wasn't, I loved Edwin Edwards at that time, of course. And it was the first time that I saw the lines to polls around blocks. I mean, it seemed like miles long. And I said, oh, I'm getting in this line. Because no way the city of New Orleans can be in the hands of someone who is hateful. And so, but Edwin Edwards definitely had the tenacity. He knew how to work with people. But John Bell Edwards is definitely it. And of course, he's going to be the governor under my leadership. And we need the best relationship possible to deliver the goods for the city of New Orleans.
Besides yourselves, who's the most talented politician on a national and local level you ever knew?
Bill Clinton.
Sid? Give a local example, too, if you can. You have a local example of a really talented politician, Moon?
Mitchell Landrieu.
As Dutch Morial used to say, there's a wise father who knows his own son. Sid?
On the local level, I say all the previous mayors before me.
You're being a real
and the
diplomat.
two following me.
How about national?
National, I think I think Barack Obama really has done did a great job, and he's not getting the credit for it. In fact, Trump is horrible. I mean, no, seriously, I think if Barack would have done what Trump is doing now, he would be in jail. They would have impeached him. They would have put him in jail. I really sincerely believe that. And I cannot understand some of the people voting for Trump.
Well, that'll be a topic for another discussion, I'm sure. Mitch?
Well, I'll answer the presidency issue in a couple of different dimensions. I think Barack Obama is going to go down as one of our nation's greatest presidents when history sees him in the distance. Bill Clinton will not get that high because of the troubles that he had historically in office, but raw talent, we haven't seen another politician with that level of breadth and depth of Bill Clinton. You haven't seen that in a long time. On the local level, and this is really, of course, it's my father, but you know, I want to just say this because I don't think the people in New Orleans have a full appreciation for how good, even though you get mad at us all the time, how well received the mayors of New Orleans are across the country for the amount of work that we did. Literally every one of the mayors that we've had has been recognized nationally for the work that we've done because New Orleans is such, even given its small size, for its revered city, and Mayor-elect Cantrell will be too. And on that regard, the one of us that's actually spent more time on the national stage than the rest of us, although my father served some time as the Secretary of HUD, is Mark Morial, who today is really regarded as one of the great national leaders. As the president of the National Urban League, and just by terms of longevity, you know, has demonstrated some really significant political might. And then finally, not pay attention to the next generation. You have a lot of really young, good leaders coming up. Your next city council has got a lot of really good, you know, folks on it that are going to do well for you in the future.
Toya?
I agree with all that's been said. But definitely Barack Obama, I think that we will appreciate his leadership more as years go by. Our mayor mentioned Morial. I agree with that as well. The authenticity was definitely there. And I would even, I think all of our mayors have been great, particularly everyone on this stage, and of course the tenacity of Landrew here.
This is the last question, but it's really a very current issue, so I'm going to focus on our current mayor and the next mayor, and then we're going to thank everybody. This is a question that was tweeted in, so thank you all for everyone who has texted or tweeted in questions. New Orleans has always been a port city that has welcomed immigrants over the years. Immigrants, every wave of immigration that America has had since, other than colonial, and the 13 original colonies came through New Orleans, among other places. What role do you think New Orleans can play in addressing the immigration issue in America today? Mitch, I'll start with you, and then LaToya will give you the last word.
We started off this conversation about race. Race is a form of hatred. That's where it comes from. That's the root of the tree, is hatred. And discrimination is really kind of the essence. And we see this manifesting itself now in the United States of America. I agree with Mayor Bartholomew. I think President Trump is awful. And one of the things that he's doing in this country that the people in the South have heard for a long time, because he sounds like Bull Connor, he does. It's just a repetition of what we've heard here on this issue, is that somehow, and he said it when he came down the elevator, Mexicans are rapists. Now, he may not have meant it completely, totally, or completely specifically, but he delivered the message that people that are brown are less than, and there's something to be feared. And I think the country's got to stand up to that. Now, in the city of New Orleans, you may not want to admit this, but it is the truth that after Katrina, the people that helped come back and rebuild this city were not all legal. But for their presence here, this city standing back up as quickly after Katrina would not have happened. It just would not have happened. Whether you're for it or not, those people that are on the anti-immigration side, nobody was asking for cards when people were cleaning out your nasty refrigerator. You remember that? And so I think it's important that we can kind of be smart about how we handle this. Clearly, a nation without borders is not a nation. I think that's clearly true. You don't have to state that, but it is also true that you have to be an open and a welcoming city, and that we're not going to go round up and deport 11 million people. That's just not going to happen. And the kids that we call DACA kids should not be held hostage in this immigration crisis. And I would just simply say this to my friends in Congress. If Congress was to do its job and pass comprehensive immigration reform, which they have not done, it's right there, there's a deal that the country can have, then we really wouldn't be having this issue. I'll just speak for the city that I'm the leader of at the moment. And I believe the mayor-elect agrees with me, but she'll be able to speak for herself. We, the city of New Orleans, are who we are because of everybody that has been part of this city from the beginning. That is where our strength comes from. That is essentially who we are. That's why when we're celebrating our 300th anniversary, we're actually going back to every country that had anything to do with who we are in our music, in our food, in our architecture. And we're inviting them back in because we want to make this statement as loudly as we possibly can that our diversity is our strength. And I just think the city of New Orleans represents that idea actually better than any city in America. And I think that we have to be forceful about it on what we do locally, on the state level, and on the national level.
Mayor Cantrell, the last word.
Well, being on the New Orleans City Council and truly spearheading the effort for New Orleans to become a welcoming city, it demonstrates that I believe diversity is not only a strength, but inclusion has to happen. And that's what I'm committed to ensuring that New Orleans remains welcoming, but that we're inclusive and that we really do build equity and giving people real access to opportunities to build wealth and transferable wealth. We're not there yet, but I'm going to do everything that I can as the leader of the city to get us there. And we have to get there together.
I lied. I'm going to have the last word. Well, I'm going to tell a story about my first mayor, Moon Landrieu. One day when I was a very, very young reporter, and he was a young mayor, I tracked him down, and he would probably say I jumped out from behind a bush and asked him a question. And he said, you know, only a cub young reporter would have the you-know-what to come just ask the mayor this and expect an answer. And from that moment on, he called me Boy Reporter. And I saw him about 6 months ago at Mandina's, where I could see he and Verna almost once a week. I said, Moon. When he sees me, he still says, Boy Reporter, come over here. I said, I'm 63 years old. When am I going to stop being Boy Reporter? He said, you'll always be Boy Reporter to me. So go ahead, Moon. You said you wanted to make one more point.
Well, let me take the advantage of being the eldest here on the stage, and I think I say something that my colleagues would agree. Although we speak personally today about what we did, we all know that you can't do this job by yourself. It is impossible to do it by yourself. I look at the row up here and I see my wife, I see Norman Francis and King and Ann Milling, and others in this audience, Don Hubbard. I couldn't possibly have achieved, whether good or bad, whatever I achieved. I needed that help, and every member here would acknowledge that if you're not properly staffed, if you can't turn to your good friends for advice and have good counseling, you're just not going to be a successful mayor. So I thank all of those who helped me, and I can ask all of those who have helped the other members here to accept our gratitude for that. And I will end on one thing, at least for me, okay? And that's the story of my old friend who was mayor of a small Cajun town. And he got to feeling terrible. He thought he was terminal. So he went to see the doctor. And he told the doctor, said, Doc, I think I'm terminal, man, but I'm feeling I got heart trouble, my this and that. And I said, wait a minute, let me examine you. So the doctor examines him and doesn't find anything seriously wrong with him. So he says to him, he says, now look, my friend, he says, I don't think there's anything seriously wrong with you, but when do you get these feelings? Well, he's the mayor of this small town. He said, well, I go to work and people complaining the potholes are not filled, the garbage is not being picked up, and it's this and that. And then I go home and my wife is yelling at the kids and the dog's barking, and I get this terrible chest pain. Doc sort of smiles and he says, well, let me tell you something, Pierre. He said, I think you just need to get a change in your lifestyle a little bit. He said, I want you to start walking every day, and I want you to walk 5 miles a day. And let's do this for 30 days, and then call me and let me know how you're doing. So I said, Doc, I'd do anything to save my life. So at the end of 30 days, he calls the doc. He said, Doc, I want to tell you something. I never felt so good in my whole life. You have saved me. And the doc said, well, that's just great, my friend, that's great. And he said, how are things at the office and at home? He said, well, Doc, how the hell would I know that? He said, I'm 150 miles from there now. Well, I think that's how each of us feels up here. The further away you are, the happier you are.
Well, on that note, let's all give our panelists a big round of applause.